They are the children and young people who have killed other children and young people. They've taken a life and changed their own forever. Tonight we can reveal the number of teenagers being convicted of murder has more than doubled over the past 5 years. Kamari Serenkuma Barnes was just 15 when he was killed outside the gates of his school in the middle of the afternoon. The boy who killed him was also just 15.
I think as a mum, the first thought in my head was, how could someone so young do such a terrible thing like that?
Guamari.
There was a little bit of naivety from my perspective in the fact that I had to face the reality that it is young people killing young people. People have to really take note of the victims are getting younger each time, so are the perpetrators. In terms of priority, I'm actually quite amazed that it's just been let to kind of manifest to this level.
In a Freedom of Information request, we asked the Ministry of Justice how many people between the ages of 12 and 19 were convicted of murder over 5 years in England and Wales. In 2016, there were 27 young people, aged 15 to 19, convicted of murder. By 2018, that number had risen to 57, including 2 14-year-olds. In 2020, it was 56, peaking at 66 the year before the pandemic. Keon Lincoln from Birmingham was one of the first young people to be killed this year. He was attacked by a group of youths armed with knives and a gun. His mother found him dying outside his house in the street. This week, a 14-year-old, accused of firing the fatal shot, was among 4 teenagers convicted of Keon's murder. When a young person is killed and the suspects are found, the court process may at least deliver justice for the bereaved. But beyond that, what are we learning about the killing of school children and teenagers by other young people? Is enough being done to understand how a child becomes a perpetrator? Because if we don't understand, how can we stop it?
You get in on a Monday and it's like, what's happened this weekend? If you hear about a local stabbing, you're like, right, is one of our young people, have they been affected or are they impacted by that? And I think that's a sense of worry that I don't think has always been there.
At Catch 22 in Wolverhampton, Joe Raby and Tyrone Stanley work with children and teenagers who face the threat and often the reality of violence as part of their daily lives. While the violence itself may be nothing new, what they say has changed is the way young people have become dangerously desensitised to hurting others or even getting hurt themselves.
We do speak to young people and they don't value their lives as others will. When they'll say, doesn't matter if I die. And if you're hearing sort of 14, 15-year-olds saying, so, like, that's so worrying.
I think they put all the consequences on the back burner. So they'll go out and they'll think, you know, the chances of me getting caught by the police may be low. You know, yeah. It's all a cat and mouse game with the police.
And the other change is the growth and exploitation and the ruthless calculations made by the ones doing the exploiting.
Older people who, you know, exploit them. They know that, you know, you're under 18, you won't get a long sentence for doing the same thing that I would do. Yeah. So I think the hierarchy in the crimes that they're committing within like gangs or, you know, friendship circles, it's always the younger kids that are used to do the more, you know, lengthy sentence crimes that you can get.
And a perhaps less obvious risk in all this, that the rest of us are becoming desensitised to it all too.
It's a snippet now, isn't it, in a paper? And I think, you know, are enough people outraged by it? Probably not. Something happens, we respond to it, it clears up, you know, there's a court case, and then we move on to the next one.
I've worked with both victims and perpetrators.
Dame Claudine Dewberry was a frontline social worker for 2 decades and is a former advisor to the Met Police. She now works with high-risk families and children across North London.
There's too many murders, children killing children, children becoming the victims, children becoming the perpetrators. And I think the attitude is now being taken, it's not in my backyard, so it doesn't really matter. It's not on my doorstep, so it doesn't really matter.
Do we need to do more to understand why this is happening?
We spend a lot of time, energy on serious case reviews when a child is killed, especially a child who's known to social services. But a lot of the time, these children who murder are also known to social services, or all the signs are there that they should be known to social services. So really, we should be doing some sort of investigation that says, where can we learn the lessons? Where are the signs? What are we missing? Because if we don't, the numbers are just going to keep climbing. And what does that say for society?
When your brother's like fresh today.
And the cost of nothing changing, paid in young lives, not allowed to grow old.
He's my son, so I'd always speak very proudly of him, but he was just a very fun-loving person. Didn't have any enemies, just enjoyed being a child. I think he would have made a really good contribution within our community. However, that was taken away from us.
Well, the government declined the opportunity to discuss the figures on the programme, but in a statement, the Policing Minister, Kit Malthouse, said, "Each young life lost to violence is one too many, and we are doing everything in our power to keep young people safe." Well, joining me now is Alison Cope, whose son Joshua was killed by 18-year-old Amani Mitchell 8 years ago. He was jailed for life. And also with me is Leroy Logan, who's a retired Metropolitan Police Superintendent. Alison Cope, thanks very much for joining us this evening. You live every day with the devastation of losing a child to murder. I wonder what you make of what you've heard in that piece tonight of these figures.
Firstly, thank you for having me on the programme. It's a constant stuck record. We say the same thing year in, year out, and we don't seem to be moving forward. That statement read out from the police there is, copy and pasted and read out. That is all that's thrown out.
Sorry, from the government.
Time a young person's from the government. Sorry, yeah. One life lost is one too many. But on the ground, we are seeing failings daily and young people losing their life. Even yesterday, I was trying to get help for 4 young men that were known to be carrying machetes, carrying knives. I reached out to the Violence Reduction Unit, who gave me out-of-date figures from 2 years ago for schemes that were running in the area that had actually finished 2 years ago. And these are the kind of, unfortunately, people that are supposedly doing everything they can to save young people's lives. And the figures speak for themselves. Nobody can say we're doing enough. Otherwise, we wouldn't be seeing the figures that we're seeing at the moment.
And the fact we are seeing 14, 15, 16-year-olds be killed, but killed sometimes by 14, 15, 16-year-olds.
Yeah, and until we have awareness intervention in every single school that is made compulsory, and the wraparound support that we constantly talk about, unless that is actually put in place and somebody leads the government in this, devastating crime. It devastates so many people. One crime destroys 2 families, and we're seeing that nationally. Thousands of young people are being affected. And the other thing I would say, in the last 2 months, I've spoke to over 6,000 young people. They're living in fear. You ask them what percentage of others carry a knife. I'm hearing 90%, 70%. Our children are scared, and that will never, ever be okay, ever.
Leroy Logan,
it's not all right for our children.
Sorry to interrupt you there. Leroy Logan, you were a superintendent in the Met Police for many years. I wonder what you make of the situation now.
Well, it's exactly as it was 15, 20 years ago, where you don't have a real understanding of what's happening with young people. That's why I set up a charity called Voice Youth, because we need to understand their experience, know their reality, and understand you can't arrest you out this problem. You can't stop and search you out the problem. You've got to work with the target group of young people, recognizing education is the key, because you need to know that how peer pressure is so invasive in youth culture or in certain pockets of youth culture. And now you have social media that exacerbates. So for example, 15, 20 years ago, even if there was a fight or a stabbing, it was relatively contained. Now, if there's a fight and a stabbing or someone's been disrespected, it's not just left. Social media takes it over and over. And as a result of that, those people feel embarrassed and they don't want to lose their credibility and they will take retribution. And then you now hear everyone in certain urban areas of 90% and over are carrying knives or other forms of weapons. And then there's the police not connected with these young people because of austerity and the lack of safer neighbour teams, safer schools officers to keep in touch with these young people, and as a result of that, have more proactivity to know where the next feud is or where the knives are being kept and so forth. So this disconnect has been filled by dysfunctional role models, and then you have a high exclusion rate. So a lot of young people are being excluded, and they're the highest risk of being exploited. And that exploitation has taken over certain parts of the culture.
Leroy Logan, sorry, we're running out of time already, sadly, but in order for us to tackle this, this has to be a priority. Now, when Damilola Taylor was murdered, the world seemed to stop. Tony Blair went to his funeral. Alison Cope, have we lost the outrage necessary to push for this to be a priority?
I think, our young people have become desensitised, but so has society, that it is someone else's problem. And, no disrespect, when we say comments like in urban areas, what does that say to society? That if you have a white child or a child from a certain background, we don't need to educate. This needs to be a national response of emergency. Most young people do not carry knives. And if we feed them with that, reality that 90% possibly could, we're creating a real problem. We need to just make sure all the things that we've discussed we put into place, and society speaks to their children, and every school speaks to their children, and anybody in a role of authority speaks to their children, and together we can save many, many lives moving forward.
Leroy Logan, very, very briefly, the government say that they've got this twin track approach, tough enforcement and programmes to deter young people. Do you think it's enough of a priority?
No, because they haven't got the cultural competence. They really don't understand how to connect with young people, so that what they are assisting them to educate them with and to develop positive peer-to-peer mentoring, it's not helping them, especially when the heat is on, when people are in fear. And if police can't reassure young people to make them feel safe and secure, one, they're not going to go to them if there's a problem or any retribution. And two, they're not going to commit to making statements or go on an ID parade or even giving evidence of court. And so a lot of young people will take the action in their own hands and thinking more than likely they get away with it. So there has to be a massive holistic approach to this with the public health approach to understand, don't treat them as just potential prisoners, but treat them as potential patients because they're being traumatized and we need to recognize them.
Alison shaking her head there, but I'm sorry, we're going to have to end it there for now. Alison Cope, Leroy Logan, thank you so much for talking to me this evening. Thank you.
Thank you.